This week's First Chapter Friday is called Farther Than the Moon. So it is a good space sci-fi story for those of you who are excited about that, but it's also a really good family story if you like realistic fiction. Now, I don't feel like chapter 1 really gives us the scope of the whole plot of the book, so I am going to start with reading the general overview. All 13-year-old Houston Stewart has ever wanted is to become an astronaut. His dream feels like it's finally coming true when he's accepted into the highly competitive junior astronaut recruitment program. If only he could bring his little brother Robbie with him. Ever since their dad left, Houston and Robbie have been inseparable. It's hard to tell where Houston's love of space ends and where Robbie's begins. But Robbie's cerebral palsy and epilepsy means he needs medical attention at home. So Houston is forced to take this giant leap for the two of them, all on his own. At camp, Houston is quickly drawn into the orbit of new friends, cosmic adventures, and a long-lost grandfather. But as Houston struggles to meet the program's rigorous demands, he's forced to reckon with the truth that Robbie may never be able to visit space like the brothers have always hoped. Still, Houston is determined to honor Robbie's dream, even if it seems like an impossible mission. So, like a good astronaut, he dares to make a new plan, one that shoots for the stars. So this book starts in a different time frame than the majority of it takes place. So it actually starts 5 years ago. And then at the end of chapter 1, it flips into present day. So 5 years ago, chapter 1. The moon hovered above them, a silver white orb in the black Colorado sky. Its light illuminated the treetops on the mountainside behind the house and washed the two boys' small faces in a pale glow. The night was so clear, the moon so enormous, that Houston could easily spot the darker patches of gray on its surface. From almost 240,000 miles away, these patches were nothing more than smudges of ashy color. But Houston knew they were miles-wide craters and mountains and valleys created by millions of years of meteor strikes. Robbie clicked his tongue, both of his index fingers hooked over his bottom teeth as he stared at the sky. Houston leaned his head close to his brother's. His hair smelled like minty shampoo. Houston had helped Mom wash Robbie's hair that afternoon. He had been helping with all of Robbie's care every day since Dad left. 5 days. 5 days since just the 4 of them became 3. Tonight, they were 2. Just Houston and Robbie on the back deck, each tucked into their sleeping bag, gazing up at that one huge moon. Houston hated the strange countdown his family had become last week. And so, instead, he focused his thoughts on space. It's a full moon tonight. See that diagonal smudge kind of near the top? Those 3 dark spots stuck together? He pointed, and Robbie followed the line Houston's finger made across the sky. The one in the middle is called the Sea of Tranquility. That's where Apollo 11 landed. Robbie hummed, curling his knees up and leaning into Houston's ribs. A line of drool was running down his fingers, which were still hooked over his teeth. It glinted in the moonlight, and Houston used the edge of Robbie's pillowcase to wipe it up before he could smear spit all over Houston's pajama shirt. But Robbie wasn't in a feisty, spit-smearing mood tonight. He hadn't been his usual happy self since... Houston sighed. He didn't want to think about Dad anymore, about the suitcases and boxes loaded into the bed of his truck, how he'd come back into the house after Mom closed the door and Houston's heart had lurched with hope. He changed his mind, but he hadn't. He'd only forgotten something important, something he had to take with him. Houston could remember what it was. All he knew was that it wasn't him or Robbie. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of aspen trees in the yard, whispering the end of summer. Robbie grunted softly, and Houston wondered if he was thinking about Dad, too. He cleared his throat, which had gone thick and sticky. Did you know that the footprints of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are still up there in the moon dust? Robbie sucked his tongue, making a frog sound in the back of his throat. It was one of those Robbie sounds with several different meanings. Maybe contentment or distraction or even sadness. There's no wind or rain or anything up there, so their tracks just stay forever. Houston took a deep breath. Someday, I'm going to see him for myself, he said quietly, fiercely. Robbie thumped his left fist against his skinny legs, and Houston reached for Robbie's iPad, holding it up so his brother could see the screen. He supported Robbie's small wrist, wrinkling his nose a little when he felt the slick trail of drool still on Robbie's skin. The light from the screen reflected his brother's dark brown eyes as he focused, searching for what he wanted to say. Mom had gotten Robbie this iPad only a month ago, but he was already really good at using it to express his thoughts. Robbie was only 5, so he couldn't read the words yet, but the squares of illustrations were perfect for him. Houston waited patiently, holding Robbie's wrist steady so his fingers could tap the boxes he needed. Finally, the words Robbie wanted to say appeared along the top. You, brother, go moon? Houston had loved astronauts in space for as long as he could remember, but he'd never really thought about leaving Earth for real. Not until 5 days ago. I'm going to be an astronaut, he told his brother. Saying the words out loud made his heart beat hard in his chest. He knew with an urgent clarity he'd never felt in his entire 8 years of life that the words were true. He was going to be an astronaut. He was going to space. Robbie was still and quiet for a long time, his eyes drifting back toward the heavens. Then he concentrated on the screen again. You, brother, leave Robbie? Houston went as cold as the dark side of the moon. He thought of Robbie's face as the two of them had listened to the engine growl of Dad's truck fading down the long driveway. Robbie had banged his head against the headrest of his wheelchair over and over while silent tears streamed down his pale cheeks. You, brother, go moon, leave Robbie. No. Houston pulled Robbie's hand from his mouth and held it tight in his own. I won't leave you, Robbie. I promise. Moonlight reflected in Robbie's big brown eyes and shone against the dark hair as he gazed at Houston. He looked so much like Mom, especially with his jaw set stubbornly, his lips pressed into a thin line. Houston felt a jolt of jealousy. He wished he looked like Mom, too. Then maybe he wouldn't see pain slide across her face every time she looked at him. Instead, Houston shared Dad's auburn hair and long freckled nose. They had the same broad smile. The only difference was Houston's eyes. Dad's were hazel. Houston's were as blue as the sky. Robbie reached for the iPad again. You, brother, go moon. Take Robbie. Go moon together. Houston chewed his lip, thinking hard. Nobody like Robbie had ever been to space before. But it had been nearly 50 years since any human had stepped foot on the moon. The world changed a lot since then. Space travel had changed a lot too. Soon, NASA would be sending another crew to the moon, including the first woman and person of color. So why not Robbie? Yeah, Houston whispered, and then more loudly, yeah, I'll take you. We'll go to space together. Again, the words held the weight of truth, and Houston felt them settle in his heart. Robbie clicked his tongue, hooking an index finger over his lower teeth in a cheeseball grin. It was the first time Houston had seen Robbie smile in 5 days. He couldn't let that grin disappear again. I'll never leave you behind, Robbie, Houston said, pulling his brother close. I promise. And that is chapter 1. After this, it does flip forward to present day, so 5 years later, and we see that Houston does get accepted into a space program, and now he is going to have to leave Robbie for a time. So it's a really good family story. Great if you love space. Come by the library and check it out.